hip hip hooray for dear old Lambda. Let's give a hip hip hooray and shout it to the sky. We'll make the rafters ring when all the fellows sing about the cross and the crescent. It's the grandest thing. We'll shout it loud and strong. We'll shout it all day long because we want the world to know. We stand together now. We stand to win and how for dear old Lambda Chi.
I wish to talk to you today about several things, but one of the things I wish to start off with is to talk to you a little bit about shortcuts. Because in today's society, I'm extremely worried about shortcuts in the fraternity world, in our fraternity life. Just Thursday night, Bobby Ray and John Knipe and I were invited down to the alley down on the waterfront by my wife, who later on did not show up, by the way. I'll talk with 3 or 4 of you undergraduates later on tonight. If you're still in the fraternity. But I had all the directions. I had been given the directions by my wife that we would go 8 blocks down 4th Street, we would immediately take a right turn, we would go 2 blocks there, and then we would take a left. The only problem was that I had invited Bobby Ray and John with me. And of course, these two know more than I do, even though they know nothing about directions. And as we walked down the street, we finally got 7 blocks, and I said, we go 1 more, and all of a sudden John says, no, I know a shortcut. We immediately started to go to the right, and all of a sudden I said, wait a minute, fellas, I'm the leader. You don't tell these 2 guys anything. I was in front. They immediately move up in front. As we start down to the right, all of a sudden it goes into sort of a dark alley. And there you see about 15 or 20 of the St. Louis brothers. And you realize if we continue straight down this path, we've got to pass all these people in the dark. Before I realized it, the 2 men in front of me had immediately taken a left turn. And both were in the outside fast lane. And we immediately went up the street and we went past the place in order to come back. 2 things I learned from that. Number 1, sometimes it takes you longer to take a shortcut. And number 2, don't ever take a shortcut with 2 wimpy people. Part of the shortcuts that I talk to you today about will be expressed in many ways. For today, I talk with you very sincerely about our ritual to our brothers. And you will have to depict this out. To our guests, I talk to you about society and shortcuts. And to associates, I talk to you about the future. Allow me to start off in this shortcut with just any word like the word pleasure. Pleasure in our society has been given a bum rap. So for so many times in the work ethics of today, we have decided that to just have pleasure is very bad. We even sometimes express this in the fraternity, don't we? And yet, as we start looking at pleasure, we have to recognize that pleasure in its proper perspective is one of the great motivators. For after all, yesterday, as I looked at the Duke Flad recipient, I saw a mother and a father who seemingly had been fulfilled, and there were expressions of undeniable pleasure. So many times, whenever you have done nothing but dig a ditch, if the ditch is really dug well, and you get to the end of it, you look back, and you are fulfilled because you have done a good job. And you have pleasure. I think our problems do not come when we realize that pleasure is, in fact, not exactly what we're after, but it's the end result of something that we get by doing something worthwhile. And in the midst of pleasure, there is always fulfillment. I'm afraid that in today we do take shortcuts. We're in a society of shortcuts, as a matter of fact. Our society today, you can literally go to a movie and you can see the history of the world in 2 hours. It used to be if you wanted to cook beans, it would take a day. Then we got the electric stove, an hour, and now we're at a microwave, and we can do it in 30 seconds. Anything to get things faster. And so today we expect an immediate response, a quick fix. Shortcuts sometimes become a way of life. As we think about pleasure and shortcuts, we have discovered something in our society which is very damaging to us. For instead of going the long road, instead of being fulfilled, sometimes, even in pleasures, we have taken shortcuts. We now have determined scientifically that in the use of cocaine, there is an element known as morphia. And this morphia actually stimulates the pleasure part of the brain. It is a key in which you can very quickly get through the fulfillment, not spend the time, and just use the key, and all of a sudden it's open and you have almost immediate pleasure. Not too long ago, I went to the hospital for a knee operation, and I read over everything because I wanted to know what was happening to me during a knee operation. I wasn't too pleased with this, and all of a sudden I read this, and in the process of this outpatient saying, it said, "We will inoculate you, after which time you will feel a great deal of pleasure." They inoculated me. I lay there for a while in something that I dreaded, and all of a sudden they said, "We're ready to go," and I said, I really don't care. They said, "We're going to operate on your knee." I said, "Take my leg." Anything you want, everything is all right. All I could feel at that time was a euphoria of pleasure. My God, we have found the shortcut. Shortcut is not limited there in drugs. For you see, we also have found shortcuts too sometimes in alcohol and abuse. For after a while you have seen it. We've gone into places and all of a sudden we've had to study for long and hard, and now then we want to get away from that. Let's forget that, and so what do? We take a shortcut to pleasure. Sometimes there are things even that we want to forget. In order to forget those things, we use alcoholic beverages. But we're not limited there either. It almost becomes a way of life. For even at your school, remember when you go to the football game or the basketball team, and we're going to go see our team win or draw. But if they lost, it's not our problem, is it? Because you see, the reality of it is that we have dissected winning and losing, and we win and they lose. Because we are in fact looking for pleasure. I would also suggest to you there are many other types of shortcuts. For after all, the ideal for going to college is to get an education. And in the process of getting an education, one of the things that you need to do is to gain knowledge. And now all of a sudden you have waited too long. And now it's time for the exam. And now you found a way to cheat. There's results in all of these shortcuts. The problem with all of these shortcuts, in the case of cheating, is the reality is that you got the grade, but you're unfulfilled. I go back my freshman year at college, and I could remember we were taking a very difficult biology test. At that time, God forbid, I was a pledge. And I could remember sitting in a room with two other pledges at the time, and all of a sudden we're studying hard for this biology. On the last test, I think I made 56, and I was second in the class. And I failed too. Something must have been wrong with the professor. But I can remember as we studied for this, we saw the difficulty of it. And finally the word came across that over in one of the FIMU girls, they had the test. It's the first time I could remember that we wanted little sisters. We talked about this girl, and she was dating one of the brothers, And as we talked about it, she said, there's a way we can get this test. There's a way we don't have to study all night tonight. There's a way we don't have to study tomorrow. All we've got to do is get that test, and we just got to remember everything on it. And her brother was standing over in the corner. And he walked over and said, "What are you doing, fellas?" We said, "We're getting ready for a test." He says, "What happens if you do get the test and you cheat?" And my response, because I was subjected to this, was, "Hey, nobody will know." I can remember Ernie Ball leaning over and putting his hand on the table. And he said, "We'll know. We'll know, won't we?" We didn't get that test. There were 3 of us. 2 C's and a B. And I walked around after the test and told every one of my great and that I got it honest, even though they had A's. But there was a fulfillment in that. Because you see, the reality was that I had taken the long way. And we had taken the long way. And had it not been for someone else, we would certainly have taken the shortcut. And so I tell you that there is an emptiness in the shortcut. Regardless of whether it's drugs or regardless of whether it's alcohol or cheating or whatever you do, there is an emptiness and an unfulfilled relationship with whatever you're involved in this. I would also tell you something else. My opinion is that there's a new theory, and the theory is this. We have talked so often about illegal drugs. We have talked so often about alcohol. We have talked so much about addiction. I am not at all sure that's the problem. Because while we recognize that one can have an alcoholic addiction and we can recognize what one can have a drug addiction, we are talking about a chemical component of the body. But the reality is that those are the elements that go into the brain and that give you this pleasure on a moment's basis, because that's the key. You see, all these years we've been telling you that drugs are bad, drugs will hurt you, and the reality is that drugs are very pleasurable. But they're the shortcut. The reality is that even if you go to the hospital and get totally detoxified, that no longer will your body decry this. Why is it that every time that we do that, that the chances are over 9 out of 10 that you'll still go back? Oh, the memory of pleasure is still there. And we become addicted to almost a habitual pleasure that plagues us each time we get into a situation. Oh, if I could only get that. Oh, if I could just rely upon this. Oh, things aren't going well. Let me go back to this. And all of a sudden, we are addicted to pleasure through a shortcut. All of a sudden, our lives become shortcuts. That's the reason that each day that we come back, classes haven't gone well. Many of our undergraduates can smoke marijuana and suddenly taking a shortcut. The only problem with that is if you look at the grades of that individual, if you look at the quality of life of that individual, you will see a constant deterioration, because the shortcut has taken over the life. Lambda Chi Alpha has a solution. Lambda Chi Alpha has always had a solution. And I would suggest there are at least 3 ways in which we have this solution. For first of all, there are no shortcuts in brotherhood. There are no shortcuts in achievements. If you will remember, not without labor is something that we have been taught ever since we came into the fraternity, and you cannot labor and take a shortcut. For labor is in fact fulfilling oneself to reach toward pleasure. Certainly not living for pleasure, is living for fulfillment that might illustrate pleasure. The second thing which I would suggest is that we have used influences. Sometimes peer influences. But let me give you an illustration. We certainly have been using this for years. And let me use the expression of neophyte mentor type of influence. For many times when many of our freshmen come in and suddenly you put big brother and little brother types of situation. And now then we see this everywhere in different ways in businesses. Oh, if you will have but seen the saga of Star Wars. Now then we recognize that this classic already has been viewed by over 95% of the people of the United States. And now then, what is there that captures us about this Star Wars? Because the reality is, even though we talk about Star Wars, it could better be classified as the education of Luke Skywalker. For in the reality, you will remember that here was a young man of about college age who suddenly is interested in being a pilot in modern times and in the future. And instead of being that, he is influenced by his mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Obi says, no, not a pilot, a Jedi. A Jedi in the universe. And do you remember the first lesson that this mentor gave him? The lesson between good and evil. And the forces that good and evil have and how to obtain them. If you'll remember, Luke Skywalker is placed inside of this simulated airplane, and all of a sudden you can see the simulated planes coming left and right, and he is expected to shoot these simulated planes, and now he is not doing well. And his mentor looks at him and says, feel the force, feel the force. And then he looks at him and places his hand and says, Luke, close your eyes and feel the force. Luke closes his eyes for the first time. And there is an unknown force. And Luke is fully capable of doing so many things that he has never been able to do before. Oh, and his second mentor, do you remember that one? For after all, it was Luke who went over to another planet to search out a great warrior. And as we think about this great warrior image, we know it's going to be somebody who's about 7 feet tall. We know they're going to have all types of big armor on them, but instead, it's a 2-foot green thing with warts. And you see, the author has placed this on the inside to tell us it's not what's on the outside, folks, it's what's on the inside. And Yoda, the mentor, teaches Luke how to become a Jedi. And he struggles. He struggles with this young neophyte. And one of the episodes which I enjoyed most, if you remember, Luke has flown his plane into the lake and now it is sunk. And part of the training which Luke Skywalker is being taught by Yoda is that he is attempting to get him to levitate rocks by concentrating and raising the rocks. And finally, Luke says, how am I going to get my plane out? And he says, levitate. He says, I can't. He says, sure you can levitate. And he goes out and he works the train. He says, okay, I'll try. And then the words would sting all of us in fraternity and in society. When this little ugly creature stops the crowd and stops me in my tracks. When he says, not try, you will do, or you will do not. Do you see what he's saying? That today, trying is a soft commitment. You decide that you will do it or you will not do it. To say that I will try is simply to say I will put some of my effort forward. No, that's not good enough for fraternity, and let me tell you why. The stakes are too high. You are playing with lives out there. You are the most influential people to other undergraduates in our society. Today, you have someone in your hand. Today, you will determine whether or not they take a shortcut. And your influence is going to make the difference. I have been bothered, as we all have been bothered, by the fact that we have to be models. We have to be model brothers. If you remember, you made that pledge. You made that oath. As we've read the newspapers, I have been perplexed. As we've read the story of Len Bias, here is an individual who has worked all of his life, and he is now ready to go to the pros. He's ready to go to his dream with the Celtics. After being signed, he comes back. He uses cocaine, and he is dead. To be honest, I'm simply tired of hearing about it. But as I looked at it one day on television, I heard one of the boys in the room with him make this statement. Well, Lenny had just come back. You see, that night, he was out with the brothers. I want you to listen to how today sometimes we use the term brothers. And I want to tell you, I stand up indignant and saying, no, if he'd have been out with brothers, this wouldn't have happened. For surely someone who was a brother would not have let this have happened. They would have told him, no, Lenny, you're going to ruin your life with this. Don't you know this is a shortcut? Don't you know how dangerous it is? And I become totally indignant because after all, you see, I am a model brother. Then suddenly I go back. Go back 29 years. And I can remember back in North Carolina, 1957. As High Alpha, I was given a note, and on this note it says, there's a young man who's going to be a freshman this year, and I wish that you would go up and talk with him. He is Lambda Chi Alpha material, I hope. And so I decided I'll go up and see this young man who is Lambda Chi Alpha material. And so I can remember going up to the third floor of McCulloch Hall and knocking at the door, and all of a sudden the door opened, and inside, I'm not sure just what it was. For something was peeping out, and you could hardly see what the eyes were, and I said, could I come in? And then there was a long hesitancy. And then the doors opened, and there in front of me, a 6'2", 135-pound person with glasses on an inch thick. He had a t-shirt on that was 4 sizes too small and boxer shorts on 8 sizes too large. His legs looked like toothpicks and his feet looked like canoes. And suddenly as I sat down and I told this guy, I started telling him as we all do, oh, let me tell you about Lambda Chi. Let me tell you the leaders we are. Let me tell you how many people we have in the SGA. Let me tell you how many people we have in fraternity life. Let me tell you how many people we have as officers. And all of a sudden he says, wait a minute. I don't know whether you got the right person or not. I said, you see, I'm not a leader. And I said, wait a minute, let me tell you about our followers. Let me tell you how, all of a sudden, you know how we change that, don't you? He was properly named Bones, and that gave him the benefit of a doubt. Bones was one of the funniest guys I'd ever seen. Bones was one of the guys, and he used to come down and say, hey, can I shine your shoes? And we let him shine every shoe in the house. He'd say, you got any more? Oh, such a lovable character. We used to come in and just watch him shine shoes. And then later on, you know, we took him out and we had a party one day and he had his first beer. You want to see an introvert turn extrovert. You watch this guy. He turns into a Hyde all of a sudden. And you give him a beer and he's a funny. We stopped having entertainment and we started feeding him beers. One of the stories was that don't ever let Bones have a beer until all of us get there, and then we'll stop the band. Because Bones was the funniest thing you'd ever seen in your life. And all of a sudden one night when Bones was getting ready to walk across the lake, I could remember swimming out and getting him and bringing him back. And he says, I could have made it if I could have swam or walked. Oh, Bones was such a lovable character. And I helped make Bones everything that he was. And Bones flunked out of school. See, Bones became an alcoholic. Bones went to an institution. Maybe some of our brothers were out with Bones when he did this. Sometimes, brothers, late at night, when things haven't gone well, I lay in the bed and I really think, gee, I wish I had not become a Lambda Chi. standards are so high. The people are so great. There's so many demands upon you. The oaths are so strong. They seem to drive you. They seem to make you constantly aware of everything that's around you. And then I realized that our strength is not in me or any one of us. The strength is in the bond. And in my weakness, I can hear in the background someone saying, society saying, forget your ritual. It's just idealism. Forget your oaths. They're meaningless. They're undergraduates. Listen not to either of them, neophyte. Come over here and live in the world. Make your money. Get your career. Live for your pleasures. Life is short. Shortcuts are okay. As a brotherhood, we have a heritage unequaled. We are bound by a brotherhood unequaled in our society. If but could countries mimic us, we could stop wars. If brotherhood could be established throughout the world with what you and I have given oath, then we too could recognize things that colleges have been saying all along. For the reality is that in our society today, colleges can no longer bring in organizations or allow organizations that deter any of the educational process. But they must cling to those organizations which are in fact improving the quality of life for a person for a lifetime. Our fraternity is that, at its best. We are bonded as brothers. And the force, whether we recognize what force, is changing our lives and the lives of others. This world is better because of us. My God. No wonder you have blessed us and allowed us the force of God.